Welcome to Suzanne's studio. I'm Suzanne Barnett, your host. Tonight, we are having a very interesting and I think a very necessary program because I have my guest who is Jim Claitor, and Jim is a minister and also an author. And I thought that this time of the year, which is the holidays, which sometimes is very hard for a lot of people. And I think tonight's show is going to be very, very invigorating. Jim, welcome.
Thank you.
You've been on the show before. We talked about you being an author, and the name of your book is
Build the Life You Want and Still Have the Time to Enjoy It.
What I think is so interesting about your book, because I have read it, Jim, it kind of pertains to what you do, how you help people in different stages of dying and other things, the fact that you're a minister. Why did you want to become a minister?
It was interesting. I mean, literally was listening to my family battling over some subjects, and suddenly I just felt that there was a way I could be helpful and bring my faith to bear on these kinds of problems. And it wasn't a second later that I realized this was going to be my direction, and I felt comforted in that and supported in that, and went to see my minister and got on the track to go to seminary.
And you have really, it's made your life, hasn't it?
Really has.
I mean, it's enhanced your life, of course.
Yeah, I think I've been given much more back than I ever gave. I mean, my whole heart was in giving, but somehow when you give, you tend to receive even more.
I have some, I think, provocative questions for you, if that's okay.
That will not come as a surprise.
Well, we have to make this really a fascinating show. And also, I believe it's an important show. I really do. Why do you believe in God?
You know, people ask that, but I think it takes more energy not to believe in God than to believe in God. Many people have asked that question throughout history and written books on the subject. So I'll try to keep it short, but I think there's more evidence that life is tied up with God, that God is involved in life and involved with people, than there is evidence to the contrary. Of course, there are people who disagree with me, but you asked me what I believed, and I believe that.
Jim, but there's still no scientific evidence that there is a God, that there is a heaven, afterlife. Why do you believe that there is?
You know, I remember that I had a day in the church where I had 10 people to see in counseling. I had sermon to work on. I had so much to do. I had a family that I wanted to spend time with. But at the end of seeing the 10 people, I was so exhausted. I was so beat. I got in the car in 110-degree heat in Fresno, got to my house, and I put my feet on the ground and I burst into tears. I simply had nothing left. And I said out loud, I said, God, I can't do this. You're going to have to help me. Well, the next day I had even more people to see in counseling. There just seemed to be a lot of people who needed help at that particular time in history. And as I talked to them, I just said to myself, you know, Lord, I need the help. I can't do this by myself. And I found myself just getting more energy from every conversation than I had the previous day. And at the end of the day, I had more energy than I started with, and felt good, and I felt I could be open to my family and energized. And I believe that a lot of people have experienced that same kind of sense, that if they open themselves to that other dimension, to God, that they themselves will find that, you know, that they are actually stronger at the end of the day, no matter what they've tried to face.
So you feel that there is another power, another energy
Yes.
that really exists?
I feel it's a presence, that there is a movement behind everything we do, and that the more we're open to it, I think some people have a better sense of that than others, but that the more we're open to it, the more it channels through us, and the more it helps other people.
Because of what you believe. It's your energy.
Yeah, sometimes people say, don't bother to pray for me because I've had this said in the hospital, don't bother to pray for me because I don't believe anyway. And my response is to still care about them and say, it's enough that I believe.
Really?
Yeah.
And then how do they react to that?
They say, fine, pray for me.
Really?
Yes.
Who do you think, I don't know if this is a good question or not. Do you think that older people have more difficulty as they are approaching death? Not necessarily they could be healthy, but just the fact of their chronological age. Do you find that those people are more difficult to deal with?
I actually find the contrary.
Really?
That they're easier to deal with.
Why?
Because they're asking the questions. I think the biggest part of opening yourself up is asking questions and starting to say to yourself, what do I believe? If somebody comes to you, Suzanne, and they say, I'm going to be dying soon, what do you believe about death? Do you believe in an afterlife? You're really forced, to stop and ask yourself some questions about what you believe. And as people get older and they age more, I think they start to address these issues. They start to ask questions about it. And, once you enter into dialogue, good things happen.
But when I was young, I never thought about dying. But now that I'm older, I'm kind of preoccupied with worrying about it.
Well, that's kind of my point. I mean, you're now facing, up to it and saying to yourself, what's next, if anything?
Yeah.
And, how am I going to approach it when my time comes? A lot of people spend their time actually worrying about how they're going to die. They don't want, for instance, to have their body fail them and their mind still be working. And these kinds of issues come up, which frequently are addressed by ethicists, and whatnot. But I think that people given a choice would like to go peacefully.
Of course, of course. What do you do with a person who is just totally depressed and even wants to think about taking his or her life? How do you deal with somebody like that?
I think the first thing is to establish a relationship where they feel they have someone to talk to and help them kind of open up and look at the issues that are making them feel that way. A lot of people who feel they just can't take the next step or life is too much frequently haven't stopped for a moment and looked at the little parts of life or their contribution to it or their effect on other people. And now we know that some depression is chemical, and you need to be treated for it. But some people, really just find themselves completely trapped and they don't know any way out except to think about suicide.
Yeah.
And the idea is to help them not feel trapped.
How do you do? Could you tell us how you deal with somebody like that? What would you say?
I've had a number of people come in, and it really depends upon them and what is pressuring them at the moment. What has caused them to take a look at life and just narrow it down to an either-or choice, which is, I'm going to take myself out of it, or I'm going to try and take one more step. And until I know what's going on, it's very tough to address it other than to say, you know what, I care. I care that you're in this situation, and I want more for you, and please tell me what's going on. And I think, that the more friends and people in their life that show that they care, the less a person feels completely trapped and closed off and unloved and angry enough with themselves to consider suicide.
Well, this is my definition of depression, is that it's really anger turned within, that you feel so guilty about your anger, so you're punishing yourself by just, being depressed. Do you believe that?
I think there's some truth to that. I'm pretty sure that's one of the psychological definitions.
Yeah.
But I think there's also another side to it where you just have so much going on, or so many really sad things happening in your life, that your heart just feels weighed upon, and you don't see any light. You begin to just feel closed in darkness. And I think depression can be brought on by a series of things like that. Not to mention, all the other things we know about, like postpartum depression. There's different kinds of depression.
Exactly. Have you worked with children and God?
Yes.
I mean, children, well, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I get some of the most entertaining things in the world from children. And I had one that said one time, "Do you look like God?" And I had to think to myself, what do you answer? Not really. It's not the way I see it, but why don't you draw me a picture of what you think God looks like? And believe me, the picture did not represent me. So
Was the kid disappointed?
not really.
No, you
they were
could
just,
say that you do,
yeah,
right?
they might ask you any question next. Who knows?
Yeah.
I always find that when they talk to each other about it, it's also entertaining, that they have a way of approaching the subject completely openly without all this kind of science and everything else pressuring them.
That's it. The other thing I want to say is that the Judeo-Christian religions, why do people who are really either, totally into that, what about people that have, Eastern philosophy? I mean, is God part of that? Do they believe that? Or you as a Christian, do you think you're better than those people?
Absolutely not.
Well, tell me about that.
I mean, there is a discussion. There's a lot of Christians who go with John and say, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me." Well, there's a huge number of people who have never been confronted with the faith in the first place, or have been raised in other traditions and cultures, who feel equally about Christians or Jews, and their lack of knowledge and understanding of the next life, or the great being, God. So no, I don't think I feel better than them. If anything, I just would enjoy the dialogue.
Why isn't there a universal religion for the whole planet to believe in the same thing?
Wouldn't that be nice?
Why?
And equally impossible.
I know.
I mean, you and I are different,
Yeah.
and we hear things differently, and we believe differently. And imagine, that you're born in a whole nother culture, whole nother language, whole nother way of looking at love, looking at relationship, looking at what your priorities are as a man or a woman. All these things are in a great mix, and the odds that you're going to arrive at the same conclusion about what God is, even taking just the Christian religion, you've got huge numbers of people who disagree about, how God operates, what goes on, with Jesus, all the different kinds of reading of the gospel. Is it literal? Is it not literal? I mean,
That's it. Like the Christians and the Jews believe the Bible is true, and now they're trying to disprove that. How do we know that the Bible is totally accurate?
I think that you would get different discussion on this.
Yeah,
because
but for you.
There are people who believe it literally. I tend to look and see what is it the Bible's trying to tell me. And whether you read the Old Testament or the New Testament, it's about salvation history. It's about how God is involved in life, and the prophets that interpret that. What goes on in the Christian religion is very similar. how Jesus reflected the light of God and gave us an opportunity to see God in action. These are the things that people differ on. For myself, I remember a really well-known theologian who said to take the gospel literally, you have to ignore fully 2/3 of the things that are in it. I don't agree with that. I think there's plenty in it that is very clear and about what happened, what took place, and I just think it would be tough to fool that many people.
Do you feel, this is a personal question, Jim, I know what you've already said about what you do makes you feel so good. Has it, maybe it's too personal to ask, but I love to find out the dirt. How has this, you being a minister, you believing in your religion, how has it really affected your life? You're still fairly young, and I'm sure you're very fortunate that you've come this far. But how has it really affected your life?
So you want the dirt?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
All right.
Come on.
So I'll talk to you about, the fact that there have been ups and downs. Mm-hmm. There have been times where my belief was very strong, and there have been times when I kind of floated wondering about it, especially, when I was more, as I pray more, sometimes I feel closer and sometimes I don't. There's ups and downs. But I always remember this one place where I worked as a minister, and I had never seen the meanness of ignorance. I had never seen how people can make stuff up and do anything they can to discredit someone who's working with them. And I just didn't understand how I could love them and they wouldn't love me back. It made no sense to me because I was younger and I didn't get it. And I felt rejected. And then it took me about 5 or 6 years before I realized that the person I professed to follow knew more about rejection than anybody else in history. So here I'm standing in front of a cross on Sundays, and I'm forgetting to look back and remember, that it's not about me. It never was about me. It's about who I represent at that moment, and that I want to represent the best of what God offers, not, oh, gee, poor me. But I still managed to represent poor me for a couple of years. And then suddenly I found that momentum again and understood the mistake I had made in thinking and corrected my direction. And I feel the better for it, for having been broken and repaired, so to speak.
And I think what's so interesting is that you sometimes have to be broken to realize that you can be repaired.
I think that's true. I mean,
I really do.
We were talking about facing death. What does it do but force you to look at the way you're living your life, and are you giving the most you can to life? Are you giving the most to yourself that you can? Are you taking care of yourself in terms of how you feel emotionally and what you do for yourself on occasion to make yourself feel special and to make the other people around you feel special? It's interesting because I've had people, come through my life who almost leave darkness behind. I mean, it's like somehow or another their negativity just kind of rubs off. And I've had other people come by, and I call them saints. I know that's, different from, say, the Catholic version, but they come by and somehow you always feel better about yourself, for their having passed through your life, and they've given you something wonderful. They may not even know they've given it to you. And so I feel like as we, age and we look more at death, it's time to really stop and say, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? Because it's living that counts for us right now,
Would you describe that as facing death, really? That you have to live your life and do what you can for not just yourself, but for other people? Would you describe that as facing death?
Yeah, I would. I think that, first of all, none of us is going to escape it that I know of.
No, right, right.
So the bottom line is, we're going to die. And I think we get concerned about how that is, like I said earlier. And the people I talk to, that's one of their primary concerns is, they're terrified that their head will be okay, but the rest of them won't be working. And as one person said to me recently, who is lying in bed in exactly that condition, this isn't living. I want to die. That's the contrast that she drove. And of course, this brings up issues of quality of life, of what constitutes living, these kinds of things. But I believe that as we face death, we also face life. Now for me, death isn't the end. I don't believe it's the end. I believe there is another dimension to life and you simply pass into it. I lost a very close friend recently who happened to be a PhD, in counseling psychology. And she knew her death was imminent, and she just took her time making sure she said goodbye to all of us, knowing that, made sure we knew that we were loved. My own grandmother did this. Everybody who came to the side of her bed, the only thing she'd say to them is, "I love you." That was where they were, and then she passed. And I know she believed that she would move into another dimension, and that there are people in this life who seem to be able to reach into that dimension and pull out information.
Something, I've thought of this recently, is that why wouldn't I believe that there's something else? I have a choice. We don't know. They're doing all kinds of studies, right, of people that have near-death experiences, and they all kind of say the same thing. So, why can't you, as a minister, tell someone like me, well, you have a choice. You could go through, your old age worrying that you're going to die, and that's it, or you can have the other feeling, the other theory.
I think
Can you do that?
You can, but if somebody really isn't prepared to listen or ask questions, then I'm just forcing myself on them, and I won't do that.
Really?
I think if a person is starting to ask questions about it, I share those kinds of things. I mean, we said earlier, no scientific evidence. Well, they're studying, very knowledgeable people are studying what happens with these near-death experiences and what they see. And even comes up in hypnotism once in a while, where people see other lives that they've lived. So you start to have to look at this life and say, how much am I just simply forcing myself to focus on this and not thinking beyond it? How do you get someone to think beyond something is really one of the questions you're asking.
Yes, right.
And there's plenty of evidence around that it might be good to pay attention to some of these things and see where they sit with you, because you really have to force the issue to believe there's nothing else. In my mind, anyway. Other people feel you have to force the issue to believe in something else. But that doesn't work for me.
Isn't it funny how we're all wired so differently? But I think what you're doing is just really, very admirable, to talk to people who are really down and out, and because you're such a positive person. And I think what you've done, Jim, because of your experience, you wrote that great book. Tell the name again.
Build the life you want and still have the time to enjoy it.
Yeah.
But I've told you before, I think we should have named it Overwhelmed and Overcommitted, because that's the way life is.
That's it.
We want people to see their way through that.
But you really have used your knowledge and so forth to help other people. And what else is there? Really?
I can only tell you that I have received so much help from other people myself that it's really a giving back.
We have 2 minutes. What would your final words be, as it were?
If I was dying, or my final words
No,
now?
here. I know. This double entendre. Go ahead.
I think that once again, people tend to focus too much, on getting through the next stage of life or the next step, and not enough on the broad world around them, of the people that are around them. They forget to tell. They get very perfunctory and say, "I love you," but they don't say, "I love you." And I think that life would be so much more full for everybody if they would simply remember to be fully themselves, that they count, and that what they say counts and affects other people. There used to be a time where we called it Gestalt therapy, where everybody shouted things, and people remember stuff like that. I think what you say to a person gets remembered. So it's important to say something that makes sense to them and builds them up.
I really like that, and I really like the fact that I've had the opportunity and honor to interview you, because this is a difficult subject. It really is, and you sure had the good answers, I must say. Thank you. I wish you the best, and keep doing what you're doing. And I want my crew to stay with me too, because they are the best. I don't know what I would do without my crew and KMBT. And of course, my viewers. You know something? Thank you so much for watching. Guess what? I can't wait to see you next time, really. Bye-bye. Happy Christmas, Happy New Year's, everything in the best of health. Mwah, mwah.